Everyone hits a bump in the road. What do you do with it? Be inspired as we explore the ways people experience, navigate, and manage the ups and downs and twists and turns in this road trip called life. Welcome to another episode of Bump in the Road. The basic podcast is always free. We also have a premium subscription called Bump 2 that lets you listen in on extended behind-the-scenes conversations with our guests. Check it out at www.bumpintheroad.us. Donna Bond is a wise woman. Her wisdom is derived from having the courage to trust the universe and move ahead, in spite of not knowing the outcome. While working at a corporate job, she realized she felt stuck. A master's degree in spiritual psychology paved the path to a global consulting practice, and now she's leaving her high heels behind and moving to the jungles of Costa Rica. Why? Because a remarkable sequence of events lined up, and she is trusting that the universe is pointing her in the right direction. Join us for a great story about finding your authentic self and daring to follow your authentic path. Donna, welcome to Bump in the Road. I'm so pleased that you're here today. If you would, tell our listeners your story.
Thank you, Pat. It's so great to be here. Thank you for having me. Yeah, well, my story started at the Ritz-Carlton when I was working there as a corporate marketing executive, and I turned 44 years old. And that was a very significant time in my life because that's how old my father was when he died. And so when I turned 44, I was suddenly in a very big rush to figure out, what is my life about? What am I doing here? What does it all mean? And I had sort of this inherent fear that I didn't really have that much time left, right? Because he died at such a young age. And so I went crying to a psychic, and she said, Donna, they're spelling it out for me. Spiritual psychology. And I said, what in the hell is spiritual psychology? And she said, there's three universities that teach a program in spiritual psychology. And she gave me the names of two of them. And she neglected to give me the name of the third. And we got talking about something else, and one thing led to another, and she never told me. So I went home and consulted the Oracle, and I Googled it. And I very quickly found my way to the University of Santa Monica. And Doctors Ron and Mary Holnick have created a gorgeous master's program in spiritual psychology that they have been offering for more than 40 years. And after a great deal of reluctance on behalf of my ego and personality, I finally enrolled. And I enrolled because one woman said to me, hey, Donna, why don't you just come for one weekend and see what happens? And that right there, Pat, was such an important invitation in my life, and such a divinely orchestrated moment. I have a really strong mind. At that time in my life, was working with a whole different set of beliefs, a whole different way of seeing the world. And there were a lot of really illogical things about me enrolling myself in a master's program when I was working 60 hours a week in this very big job for this very big resort. So I needed a little bit of help from the universe. And it's one of those moments that's like etched in my mind, you know. She's like, what if you come for just one weekend? And that made all the difference. So a year into the program, I was suffering with a frozen shoulder. A year into the master's program. And I was on my way to this global leadership conference with the Ritz-Carlton. I was on an airplane. I was reading a book called Finding Your Element by Ken Robinson. And I was really excited about this book because I thought, I'm going to find my element. I've been looking for my damn element for my whole life. Hadn't found it yet. And I'm on like the last couple of pages of this book. And I'm no closer to finding my element than I was at the beginning of the book. But I'm reading, and Robinson is talking about how most of us play it safe. Most of us stick close to the shoreline. And he used Mark Twain's quote, 20 years from now, you're going to be more disappointed by the things you didn't do. So throw off the bow lines, sail away from the safe harbor, explore, dream, discover. And as I'm reading this, I am feeling the emotion that is sort of bubbling up inside of me. And I'm tired because I have this frozen shoulder and I don't feel good. And I know I'm going to this conference where I'm not going to take care of myself. I'm going to overeat. I'm going to drink too much, right? I'm just going to continue to not take care of my body. So I read on, and then he gives a Ralph Waldo Emerson quote that says, "What lie behind us and what lie before us are tiny matters compared to what lie within us." And this is bringing up even more emotion in me. And then I get to the Clincher, this tiny little 8-line poem by Elizabeth Appel called Risk. And it goes like this. "And then the day came when the risk to remain tight in the bud was more painful than the risk it takes to blossom. And in that moment, my frozen shoulder was that bud. And I feel like my whole vessel opened up, and I was given a very clear dose of divine clarity in a way in which I had never had it before. And I suddenly knew, as I was like curled up in this airplane seat crying, I suddenly knew that I had to resign from my position. It didn't matter that I didn't have a plan. And I had complete clarity that I needed to leave the job that I was in, even though I did not have a clue as to what I would do. I didn't have a clue. I didn't have a plan. At this point in my life, it was not clear at all that I would go on to become a coach. So that's where sort of it all began. I'm going to take a pause and let you get in here.
Well, no, the point that it takes risk to blossom is true, but I so agree with you. You get to a point where you cannot maintain the status quo anymore without serious injury to yourself. And you get to the point where you have to just let go and see what happens. And it can be fairly terrifying, but it can also be such a great adventure.
Well, it was all of that. It was all of that. It was all of that on both sides.
I guess I look for the adventure aspect of it, which doesn't mean that I'm not afraid at times. I'm definitely afraid. But I think that I live more fully when I'm really in the present. I don't know what the future holds. The past isn't relevant. And I think that in that present moment, you have an opportunity to make a choice. And each choice you make in each moment builds on itself until it creates your life. That moment of decision is such a moment of creativity, I think. And I would wish it for everybody.
I totally agree 1000%. Yes, my professors refer to that space as the divine unknowing, right? Where we're just in it as it's happening and as it's unfolding. And we prevent ourselves from dreaming up a drama, as I like to say, projecting at some fatal thing that's going to happen out into the future, or obsessing about the past and what we could have, should have, wanted to do, and just staying present. And it is in that present moment that our reality unfolds before us in the most gorgeous way. But we have to take our hands off the wheel.
Which is terrifying to the ego, because the ego wants to control everything.
Terrifying.
Now, a friend of mine calls that space the void,
Yeah.
which I think is kind of a good description too.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting. One of the things you write about in your book that relates to this is comfort versus familiarity. And, that on one side of the equation, and then, risk and uncertainty on the other side of the equation. But I think we all tend towards that comfort and familiarity. I mean, it's just human nature.
It's just human nature. We are such creatures of habit. And unfortunately, because we are terrified of not being able to see the end game, or we are terrified to take our hands off the wheel and to just be in that space of not controlling, oftentimes we can be in a very uncomfortable place. We can be miserable. And this is really where I was in my job at the time that I sort of had this epiphany. There were a lot of things that were confining me that I wouldn't look at the time, that I wouldn't admit at the time. And while the illusion is that it's comfortable because, I know my way around and I know what's going to happen here, and there's a lot of predictability, so I feel safe. It really comes down to the fact that it's all familiar. But the truth is, it's very uncomfortable because that space gets tighter and tighter and more confining. And I think life is designed like that on purpose.
So we get uncomfortable enough to be willing to change?
100%.
And it does take discomfort for most of us to really be willing to change. I mean, the degrees of discomfort we place ourselves in are pretty remarkable.
Pretty remarkable.
You wrote in that familiarity, in the comfort zone, I had the illusion of safety. I had the limiting belief that feeling exhausted and in pain was normal. And that really struck me because I think that we assume where we are is just the way it's supposed to be.
Yeah. Beautiful.
And until we start examining what we believe, we realize we're not seeing, we're seeing such a minuscule part of possibility.
Yes. Yeah, I concur.
And, the other thing you say that I just laugh at, I'm laughing at my own life path at this, was have no attachment to the outcome. This is where the magic lives. Oh my gosh, that's so true. At one point I hit a wall with a number of things, and I decided to sell my house, put everything I owned in storage. And this is a beautiful house. I had labored over everything in this house for decades. Well, 18 years. It's just gorgeous. And it just wasn't where I needed to be anymore. And I couldn't explain it. And a number of factors set me off, and sold the house, put everything in storage, and hit the road. Not an idea where I was going to go. It has been a most interesting journey, not always easy, but it is incredible. I find travel for me opens that door to a level of both awareness and uncertainty that is really invigorating.
Yes. Yeah, it's that aliveness that's moving through you. It's activating that sense of adventure. Our spirit, our essence, our original wisdom, as I refer to it, always wants to expand, right? It is life itself in motion. And it is this spark of aliveness that animates our physical body. And it always wants to express through us. So it's always calling us into what's next, into a bigger, freer, fuller, more expanded expression of ourselves. And when we try to confine that or contain that in our human desire for safety and control, it's not going to cooperate. It's not going to cooperate because we are meant to expand. We are meant to grow. We are meant to evolve. That is why we come for this human experience. And I acknowledge you for following that call. That's what I'm doing right now with this move to Costa Rica. It makes no sense. It makes no sense for my personality. But the universe has laid out essentially a red carpet inviting my husband and I to Costa Rica. This is not something that I would choose or pick. I have had a lot of resistance towards it along the way, but we were gifted 2.5 acres of land. Then we inherited money to build a house. Then we rented out this house. We built the house over WhatsApp during COVID. I know, because we couldn't get into the country. And it's gorgeous. And we rented it out for 2.5 years. It was rented out nonstop. And I was there in March of this year, and I kept feeling the clarity once again that I'm supposed to come live here. And believe me when I tell you, I like high heel shoes and Louis Vuitton bags. Costa Rica, I'm kind of an indoor girl. Costa Rica is very scary with the jungle and the animals and the unpredictability of Mother Nature.
And bugs,
And
bugs.
Yeah. So we came back from that trip, and it was so interesting. We were flying into LAX, and we looked out the window, and all we saw was a sea of cement before us. And my husband and I looked each other in the eye, knowing that we had just left this beautiful, lush, emerald green land of magic. And we never said anything to each other, Pat, but I feel like it was in that moment that we decided, like our souls knew this is what's next, whether our egos and personalities like it or not, this is what's next. And probably, I don't know, 6 weeks later, we started playing around with the idea, what if we did? And the real estate market was hot in California. And so we made up some crazy damn number. And we said, well, if we can get this, then that'll be a yes. Well, that took 48 hours. And we had commitments to stay in California over the next 4 months. And so, not by chance, the people who bought our home said, oh, you can stay there until October 1st for free, because we bought the house for our parents and they're not coming for, until October. And then she says, oh, and by the way, I'm happy to take all of your furniture, because we were moving into a fully furnished home in Costa Rica. So you can't make this stuff up, right? This has been the red carpet has been rolled out. The sea has been parted, and we're leaving in 8 days.
But you were alert enough to see all these signs. I think you have to pay attention to these things, but we're not always there enough to see the signs that are meant to guide us.
Yeah. Well, I began living my life paying attention to these signs, because I figure, what the hell? Do you know what I mean? Like it's a whole lot more exciting. It's a whole lot more invigorating. And what I have come to realize is I am not smarter than the universe. I am not smarter than my own original wisdom. And so I am following its lead. I am taking the cues from my higher self, and it hasn't steered me wrong yet.
Now, I think that logical, linear life that society tells us to live, we go to school, we get the right job, we have the right car, the right house, the right spouse, whatever it is, that is not an authentic path.
Yeah.
And you have to find an authentic path, which is going to be different for each and every person. How do you go about finding that?
Well, I think number one is we've got to turn our attention inward. It's not something that is outside of us. And I think that's part of the conundrum is in that same line of thinking and in that same line of teaching, we are all raised to value and to measure ourselves against things that are outside of us. And I think that's our first step of going in a direction that's not going to really be most aligned. And because, and this is really what spiritual psychology is about, it's a technology that teaches us that everything that's happening in our life is a beautifully designed opportunity for our soul to grow and evolve, to learn and expand. And when we can begin seeing our life through that lens, we're immediately in a place of empowerment instead of feeling victimized by life's uncertainty. So now I've lost my train of thought. You had said something in there that I was going to respond to, but
that's okay. Now, actually, I'm going to jump back to what we were talking about just a little. I'm going to be disjointed as well. You're talking about moving to Costa Rica and how it's going to be a whole new set of experiences. And in your book, I'm a Joseph Campbell fan, big time. And Joseph Campbell, remember when he did all those interviews with Bill Moyers? I don't know if you ever saw them. They're fantastic.
I didn't actually see them.
They're worth looking up. At one point, Joseph Campbell said to Bill Moyers, people say that what we're all seeking is a meaning for life. I don't think that's what we're really seeking. I think what we're seeking is an experience of being alive, so that the life experiences that we have on a purely physical plane will have resonances within that are those of our own innermost being in reality. That just blows me away. And having had experiences like that, I think he is so right. We're really on that quest for that incredible experience.
Yes, 100%. Well, and this is what we were talking about, right? It's, I believe we are born into situations that we have to get ourselves out of. And that's part of the hero's journey. That's part of the discovery of what is it that's going to bring you alive? What is it that animates your physical being at such a deep level that you have to say yes, right? It's like, it's not optional for you. And these are the pathways into that aliveness. But we're all hypnotized into the quote unquote right way, which is what has been taught by our parents, our teachers, our governments, our religions, our societies, our cultures, right? The influences go on and on and on. Yet we have this own inner knowing. And most of us ignore it at our peril.
But we ignore it because we are, as you say, conditioned by society. And, there are risks associated with following that path. I think there are risks associated with not following it, but following that path is a huge unknown. And that is you're putting yourself out there. It's somewhat terrifying.
Agreed. And it can be really exhilarating. What happened for me, and if this is helpful to your listeners, the ego likes a bridge. And when I resigned my position at the Ritz-Carlton, I did not go right into coaching because truthfully, it wasn't even in my scope at the time. And so what I did was I hung out a shingle as a marketing consultant because I had been in hospitality for 28 years. I had a lot of contacts. I knew what I was doing. I was able to still earn some relatively good income and sort of unwind myself from the 60-hour-a-week grind that I was in. And that really became a bridge. What I share with my clients is once we're willing to take one step, the next step will be illuminated. It will. But we don't trust that. And in our linear thinking, in our logical mind, we want to have the 26-point plan with, the exit ramps and the return on the investment and how long is it going to take, because that's what the ego wants. It wants that safety so that it knows what's going on. When we can just take one step, you don't have to take 15 steps. What can you do from where you are with what you're working with? What's one little step that you can take in the direction of where you want to be and see how the universe is going to meet you? The universe is either going to open a door or it's going to close the door. It's either going to have the road rise up to meet you or it's going to send you on a detour.
No, I think that essence of taking a step, movement, is so important. And that goes to energy.
Mm. Yeah. Well, that's my favorite thing to follow.
No, but I think Gary Zukuv wrote a lot about energy, and his book always influenced me a great deal in that he looks at the world in terms of flows of energy. Mm-hmm. And I think there's enormous truth to that. I mean, you can feel it when you're with somebody. You can feel good energy. You can feel bad energy. You can feel engagement, disengagement, whatever. It's very real. And I think if you can follow that higher flow of good energy, I think it has a life of its own.
I totally agree, Pat.
And it's scary. This is easier said than done.
100%. But to your point, that energy is the energy of aliveness. It is the energy of that effervescence that we're looking for, that upliftment that we're looking for. Oftentimes, it's harder to identify that energy because we have so much stuff in between, you and all of the limiting ideas that we hold in our consciousness, and in between you, and I say you meaning me individually, we have judgment, right? And it's that judgment that can stand in between you and really recognizing that higher uplifted energy, because our ego mind is distorting it in some way.
It's interesting. I had an experience many years ago now. It was about 95 or 6. I took my airplane, no engine, across the country, and I relocated from the East Coast to the Tahoe area. And there were many adventures and many things I learned along the way in doing this. But I came out of that adventure very effervescent, full of energy, thinking about possibility. And when that energy met the real world, man, I got slammed. Mm. The real world was not welcoming to that type of flow. And I think that is another thing you can encounter, is that when you go against the common thought, you have to have the strength to stay with what you know to be true. And it may not be easy.
Say more about what happened in the real world, quote unquote. Are you willing?
Yeah. I at the time, aviation was a really big part of my life. And I just brought all this enthusiasm, all this love of flying into everything I was doing. It dominated my life. And I had people try to who really just tried to close down that enthusiasm. I had people who gave me advice like, you don't want to live like this. This is how you'll end up. And I felt like I got kind of boxed in everywhere I went. And I didn't lose that enthusiasm per se, but I found that I had to be more careful about how I let it show out in the so-called real world. And at that point in time, I wasn't together enough to be able to say the heck with it all. I had more to learn before I was able to really let go and just say, tough, this is the way I am.
Beautiful. Well, that's a wonderful insight looking back on it now. What I find is when people are reflecting things like that to us, it's only because we're picking up what they're putting down that we have a problem.
And there's envy there. It's threatening to them. It's threatening to their status quo. How can you do this? You know, how I think that there are a lot of things that go into it. I think when you start looking at judgment, judgment is always a reflection of the person putting it out there.
Yeah. Well, looking back on the whole experience now, can you identify any blessings or gifts that were born out of that time that maybe wouldn't have been otherwise?
Oh, many, so many more blessings than one can imagine. Probably one of the most. I'll move ahead a little bit in time, but the same time frame. I was flying one day over Tahoe, about 17,000 feet. And sailplanes, for people who don't know, are these beautiful, almost handcrafted pieces of aviation art. You have 50 to 80 feet of wingspan. I mean, they can go hundreds of miles without an engine.
Wow.
It's absolutely,
Wow.
you ride the energy of the sky.
Cool.
It's absolutely amazing. Well, I had a 15-meter plane, and at the end of the wings was a little winglet, like you see on commercial, airplanes, a little wing that sticks up on the end. And it's there for lots of engineering reasons. But at any rate, I was flying, and down below me is Tahoe, beautiful blue, sapphire, turquoise water, the mountains. And I turn the plane, and under that winglet, I felt a little bubble of air. And I balanced the entire 15 meters of wing and the entire plane on that bubble of air, and I rode it through the sky with the sun streaming through the cockpit. And it was a moment of eternity, is the only way I can describe it. It was total connection, total magic. It was just stunning. And and that is probably one of the most profound things that came to me out of this whole crazed, I'm moving to the West so I can fly trip.
Beautiful.
But it was just an amazing experience. So I would say, in spite of any resistance I met on occasion, all of which was really on me, not on anybody else, some really magical, wonderful moments did come out of that period, and an enormous amount of wisdom. People find wisdom in sports and mountain climbing. I find it in flying.
Well, I feel the energy around it as you share about it. It's so beautiful.
Yeah, and I think it goes again to what Joseph Campbell said. For me, that was an absolutely spiritual experience.
Yeah.
And I think that may be the epitome of the type of experience we're all chasing.
Well, one of the things that I want to add to this conversation, and if this is helpful, we always, our linear minds have a tendency to look for a particular destination. And we say, I was headed out on this path. I was following this inspiration. I had all this enthusiasm and all this aliveness that was bringing me in this direction. And I got here, and then it didn't happen, right? Like, I got pushback from the people I love or whatever. It didn't end up going anywhere. But perhaps you needed to get to there as a pivot point to go to someplace else.
I think that's very true. And I think that those pivot points open up another world of opportunity.
Yes.
When I interviewed Martha McSally, who's the first woman to fly in combat for the Air Force, and she has a great saying, that courage is a muscle. And obviously, the more you use it, the more you flex it, the stronger it gets. And I think that's true about all these aspects of life. To have a sense of adventure, to have a sense of trust, to have a sense of love. I think all that really is essential to, over time, bit by bit, building a good life.
Yeah.
And it's step by step. It's not overnight. It is not magic, and it is not always easy.
I think that each one of us has a dynamic code inside of us that is who we came here to be in this life. And as we move our way through our respective experiences in our life, each time we're willing to face our fear, it gets translated into courage when we make that leap, right? We make the leap in the air.
Mm-hmm.
And in my experience, this is where our gifts are actually born. Our gifts actually show up, right? It's like you make that leap and your wings sprout. And these opportunities to face our fear and to birth our courage are quite necessary in the fullest realization of who we came here to be in this life. And I can look behind me in life and see perhaps where I had a chance to make a leap and I took a pass, and then I can certainly look at when I had a chance to make those leaps and I leapt and wound up with a whole bunch of gifts. And maybe it didn't turn out exactly the way that I imagined in my mind. Because again, that's my ego wanting to have it the way it wants it. But the universe is smarter than I am. So if I can open my hand a little bit and sit back in my energy and trust that it's all unfolding on purpose with a divine orchestrated plan, then I know I'm in the right place and I can just relax.
That trust is a really key component. And it's another leap to make to leap into trust.
Yeah. Yeah. And just like the courage or the muscle of courage, the more we trust ourselves, the more we strengthen the trust within ourselves.
No, that's an incredible advice. If you were to give somebody some key things in terms of building an authentic life, what would you tell them?
Break the rules. Break the rules. Break the rules. We're so obedient. And I'm not saying to do harm to others. Let me be really clear.
Of course not. Yeah.
But we shackle ourselves in our own cage, and we're the ones with the keys. And sometimes, and I certainly know, I think, was it Carol Dweck who wrote Mindset?
I don't remember.
I hope I have that right. Well, in the book Mindset, she talks about having a fixed mindset or a growth mindset. And a fixed mindset is sort of like the comfort zone, right? We know our way around. We were given the set of rules by whoever we were given it, whoever gave it to us, and we stick to that, right? It's tried and true. We know how it works. We stay in that lane. But when we're there, we're really limiting our experience of life because we're living inside of the same box that we got put in. And it can get pretty boring in there. But when you have a growth mindset, you're willing to not know. You're willing to entertain a new idea or open yourself to a new way of being or doing. And I realized when I, went back to school at the age of 45 to get a master's degree, I realized that I had had a fixed mindset my entire life. That's the way it was. And once I began to give myself permission to not know, to give myself permission to learn something new or consider something different, then I was living. Then I was experiencing that upliftment of energy because I was constantly dipping into the newness. And through that, my authenticity was born. Because before, I was trying to fit into a mold that may or may not have really been me.
Oh, I hear you loud and clear. And these molds that we find ourselves trying to fit into are subtle. They're reinforced by people around us, by society around us. Um, it is a prison, and it's not where you want to stay. But I think a lot of people do stay there. I think a lot of people actually do choose, consciously or not, to stay with those limitations.
Yes, and that's okay. That's okay, right? Because that's their journey. That is their path. And that's okay.
No, I think you're right. That is it is okay. I guess I always think that wouldn't it be good for you, for everybody, to have that chance to experience something more spontaneously, more intently, more emotionally? Because I think from that comes so much wisdom.
Yes. Well, wisdom comes from experience.
Yes, too bad we can't have the wisdom before the experience. It would be really helpful.
Wouldn't that be good? Yeah. Wouldn't that be good?
So if people would like to talk to you as a coach and an author and a very wise lady, how would they reach you?
DonnaBond.com. You can find it all there.
And even after you move to Costa Rica, you'll be in touch with people and continuing to coach and speak and everything else.
Absolutely. You know, it's a small world. We have a great internet connection. So, I serve clients all over the globe, and I will be just as accessible as I am now, even though I'll be living in the rainforest.
Well, have fun in the rainforest. I moved out west to have straight hair. Since I have naturally wavy hair, I go for the low humidity environments. So I think you're very brave.
I am.
Want to hear more of the conversation? Sign up at bumpintheroad.us as a Bump 2 subscriber. Buy us a cup of coffee. You can give it a go for free. Just use the code FREEMONTH. And thank you for listening today. I hope you found something in today's podcast that inspires you along your own life's path, because sometimes a bump in the road is actually a portal into a more conscious and meaningful life.